Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in again to this installment of the Technical Empowerment Series. Here with us today, we have the honor of hosting Christopher Naismith, who is the founder and CEO of Audette. Hey Christopher.
Hey Brian, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to speak with us and our viewers. So just to kick things off, we always like to have the guests be able to talk about themselves a little bit so the audience can get to know you. So if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing right now, and what you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Christopher Naismith. I'm the CEO and founder of Audette. And our mission is to build a carbon reduction plan for every existing building on the planet. We started our journey doing that back in 2020, really here in the Pacific Northwest. And now we're rolling out across 150 cities in the US and Canada.
Oh, that's super cool. So given the technology that you're working on, I'm just curious a little bit about your personal background and a little bit about your own journey. So just what are the sort of things that caught your eye that you're interested in that led you up to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, really in the forests, the rainforest here. But I was always really attracted to the urban environment, all things architecture and engineering. So I moved to the city, to Vancouver, and also to Montreal to study engineering. And I really started my career designing housing development. And it was really my first job. I actually moved back to Vancouver Island, where there's lots of beautiful forests. And my first job was I found myself in a forest tying ribbons around trees. And I came back a week later to find that forest clear cut to make way for the road that I had laid out the center line for. And it was kind of in that experience that I realized the larger impacts that us as engineers and technologists and designers have on the community at large. And so we have this outsized impact. We have an outsized responsibility really to make good decisions about how we design our infrastructure. And, sadly enough, we're not making very good decisions currently. So that's really how Audette came about, as a way to show the global community how to make the right decisions around our building stock particularly.
Yeah, and those kind of that's actually an interesting story. And speaking of the infrastructure that we're building, and the sadness of cutting down a lot of trees, I've been noticing just in general with discussions across different companies and just looking at the environmental space as a whole, we're all seeing this crop of technology vendors that are doing, data analysis around deforestation. We're seeing a lot of nonprofits who are doing, they're tree planting for corporations. And there's been a lot of attention being paid lately as of late around our infrastructure, the impact that we're having. And I'm curious, in your opinion, if you think back over the years, what are some high level trends that you've been seeing that you think have been leading up to this?
Yeah. And one of the major impacts from the built environment particularly is carbon emissions. It's a hot button topic now. But with carbon and really pollution of any kind, we were kind of introduced to this notion in the 1970s during the energy crisis, during the environmental movement. And it was really introduced under this banner of reduce, reuse, recycle. And it's really a form of scarcity thinking. It's about, if we can just cut back enough, we can save the planet or, reduce environmental pollution. Unfortunately, scarcity isn't a really good motivator. You only kind of get the diehard group of early adopters motivated by idealism and scarcity. And I think what we're experiencing now is really a watershed moment, a shift in mindset to one of abundance. So there's this sort of sense of inevitability that the world's economies are going to shift to zero carbon. And in the face of that, what we're really seeing is organizations around the world realize that there's competitive advantage to be had in being leaders in that transition. So in terms of, technology adoption cycles, we've made it through that early adopter phase. We're now crossing the chasm, and we're starting to see that early majority of real market leaders take significant action. And, the job of Audette and other technology companies is really just to enable that economic transition.
Yeah, and an interesting comment on that I've heard from another person is that sustainability and operating in a quote unquote green fashion has always historically been sort of a nice to have, but we've sort of moved into this era where environmentalism is a competitive differentiator from a business standpoint, which I think is something that at least historically, at least I haven't seen much of before, but now it's becoming more and more prevalent, and that broader shift has been very interesting to see. That being said, though, I want to talk about Audette a little bit more in detail, because the climate crisis and the issue of sustainability is multifaceted, right? Throughout this particular speaking series, we've had a number of different guests come on, talk about all sorts of different aspects and the problems that they're solving that occasionally, like, I haven't even thought of, and it's always been very interesting to learn about what people are doing. So what aspects of sustainability are you and Audette trying to solve, and what is your platform really trying to address?
Yeah, what we're really addressing is demystifying what needs to be done to our global building stock to get it to zero carbon. So anyone in business really knows that you can't execute a strategy without a plan. And to date, the industry at large, both across corporate, commercial real estate, and into residential real estate, hasn't really had a plan of how we're going to get to zero carbon buildings. And those are folks who have been building plans, have really been doing them on a one-off basis using service professionals, consultants, reporting, that kind of thing. That really doesn't scale to the order of billions of buildings, which is what we need to retrofit to get to zero carbon. So what Audette does is really treat that entire global building stock as one giant portfolio. And we're fitting high resolution carbon reduction models to every single one of them, address by address. And in aggregate, this creates a macro level model of exactly what technologies and finance needed to be deployed into market to get to zero carbon buildings. And then we activate that both into government, at the city, state, country level, and also into large, as our beachhead customer set, large corporate building owners, these folks who have like 200 buildings or more, and are really just trying to get a handle on exactly what they need to do to both adhere to the compliance standards that are emergent, but also, to your point, build competitive advantage by being zero carbon real estate leaders and attracting tenants like SADA, like Google, like other tech companies into their environment, because there's a lot of mandates within that tenant space as well.
Gotcha. And it's interesting to see you operate in the real estate industry, and because that's actually, for me personally, that's a area that I haven't delved as much into. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the culture of the industry and the people that you've been interfacing with. I'm just curious, when you start introducing the data that you have and the tool set that you have to this group of people, what are some overarching behavioral trends that you've seen that have been starting to shift? Like, what is there anything that surprised you about the reaction to looking at this data? And conversely, are there things that you expected, like you thought it was going to play out exactly as it did, and it didn't surprise you either?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of a surprise around every bend. I think the thing that really surprised me and kind of delighted me was to see, we did a deep market investigation to see who's actually taking action right now. And we're seeing this shift in the real estate investment markets. And so very loosely, that you have large financial institutions who invest in large property portfolios by way of managers, people who just manage that money and manage the properties. Yeah. And those institutions are starting to pledge net zero. So pension funds, endowment funds, large global banking institutions. And what happens is that then all the people who manage those assets, those buildings, then have to build plans against them. That never existed before. And so there was no real motivation beyond just saving energy or attracting tenants. But now it's actually starting to threaten the existence of these management organizations, because if they can't divest from carbon, which is effectively what they're being asked to do, they can't do business, because they just won't be able to attract the right amount of investment. And that's business viability is a much greater motivator than pure branding. Gotcha.
So it sort of feels like we're back to that part again, where there's a desire to decarbonize, but now it's another example of how it's becoming a differentiator for your end customers and their own businesses. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Talking about your solution a little bit, one of the things, of course, because we're a cloud, SADA itself is a cloud-based company, and we focus on cloud technology. So I'm going to have to ask about cloud at some point. And cloud really has been fundamentally changing the way that a lot of businesses, across different industries have been solving problems, and moving off of on-premises data centers and leveraging economies of scale have all been, the cornerstone of why a lot of companies are making that switch. And I'm curious about your thoughts on sort of both from a broader lens of the sustainability area as a whole, as well as the specific problem that you and Audette are trying to task. But how have you seen cloud computing affecting these areas, and what are some things that you think that cloud computing is allowing you to do that maybe was not possible before?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, everything. Every tech business is now, effectively running on the cloud. But I think, to the point of what it enables more generally is dealing with carbon emissions is just another supply chain issue. We're buying fuel, we're consuming it, we're emitting carbon. We're buying materials, we're combusting them, we're emitting carbon. And it really is just about trying to map out all those interactions, where things are coming from, where they're going. So supply chains in general are really complex systems. And in order to change them, you need to map them. You need to, just have all the data points so that you can run logistics on top of it. And that's really all carbon mitigation is in the building space, is about understanding where fuel's coming from, how it's being used, and how it's emitting carbon. And so what cloud computing is really enabling us to do is map out all of those systems. So we have a library of tens of thousands of different models of buildings that can be fit to any building based on what we know about it. We host that in the cloud, and then we can ingest large amounts of mapping data, aerial imagery data, and we can run machine learning on top of that in order to extract the features we need and then apply the models to them. And that's really how we build out our sort of economy scale digital twin of the carbon landscape. So I imagine you're seeing a lot of that same type of activity across waste streams and all the other supply chains that are at issue right now.
Yeah, and when you're talking about the reporting, are you referring to the the scope 1, 2, 3 reporting? Is that what you're talking about, or?
Yeah, broadly, scope 1 and 2 specifically, buildings emit carbon in two ways. One, purchasing electricity from the grid, that electricity has some carbon intensity, and then purchasing fuels from fuel providers and combusting them on site. And so those are really the two major aspects of carbon emissions from buildings that we need to map out and then to design strategies to mitigate.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's important, because also an interesting thing that I've been noticing as well with my own interactions with customers is around scope reporting too, because that seems to be more and more top of mind to executives as well, especially because these are starting to become more regulatory required as well slowly. I know in the EU there's regulations that have kicked in the US there's bound to be regulations coming around. I don't know if there's ones in Canada on the cusp. I haven't looked into that market, but I assume that is probably not far off either.
Yeah, we're seeing emergent standards and reporting requirements all over the world. And why we've chosen to start with large distributed corporate real estate is because of that. Like even where they have parts of their portfolio that are not subject to regulations, it's usually the lowest common denominator that is driving portfolio-wide policy. So if you hold property in New York or in London or in San Francisco, those are the folks who have seen that this train coming and have started to take action.
Yeah. Love for you to just sort of dust off the crystal ball for a second and see if we can poke into the future. And if you were to look at cloud computing in general and how that impacts things like climate technology and tying in the experience that you have in real estate as well, if and this is a non-binding thing, this is just pure conjecture, but if you were to look, 3-5 years into the future, what are some trends you think will be emerging, and what does that landscape look like to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. We do a lot of this crystal ball gazing. Thinking from that carbon-free future backwards is really how we build strategy. What we're going to see is a digital twin of every building on the planet, hosted in the cloud, complete with all sorts of dimensions, not just how it consumes fuel and emits carbon, but who occupies it, how much it's worth, how maintenance logistics are done, you name it. It's all going to be part of a larger digital twin ecosystem. And what that's going to allow is for, AI optimization of all of those supply chains that are applied to it. And it's going to really, folks who have adopted that type of technology and who are really hosting digital representations of their businesses in the cloud are going to be able to build really sustainable competitive advantage by just optimizing their systems using things that humans just can't do at that speed and scale, which is really the domain of AI.
Yeah. So a question that just popped in my head is around what gives you optimism that you're seeing. So I think when we talk about climate related issues, people can be prone to climate doomism, right? Like we'll go on Twitter, we'll doom scroll all day and then be like, oh no, we're all in trouble, we're never going to get out of this. But I mean, you and Audette going off and solving these kinds of problems and looking at all the other different companies that are out there, like they're solving their own niche problems. But what in this space gives you optimism? What gives you sort of light at the end of the tunnel that you see that we're going to get out of this and we're going to be okay?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, it's really important to us to show up optimistic every day. So, I mean, one thing is that I don't consume a lot of news. I think that there's a tendency for
you are wiser than I am.
There's a tendency for us to pull forward those things that are the sort of the most negative aspects of humanity. And honestly, interacting with real people in the real world gives me a lot of optimism, particularly because we can see meaningful change happening and a strong motivation. Almost every company we interact with, recognizes the challenge and are willing to collaborate on how to build new systems to adapt it. And I think, looking back at history is also useful. I would call this scale of economic transition we're embarking on, it's bigger than the Industrial Revolution was. But it is sort of a corollary. What we did is we retrofit an economy, and we did it in a relatively short period of time, and we did it with major effects on humanity. We skyrocketed the quality of life, the average lifespan, and so I think we have the capacity to do this when faced with a crisis or faced with a strong need, and we are no doubt faced with a crisis right now, but I think our power for mobilization is really, really high when we're motivated and when we have meaningful strategies on which to execute.
True. Yeah. And we're all here talking about it together as well. And so, I mean, that, we're showing that people do care and it's important and people are taking it seriously. So that's a really good thing. And with that, we're actually right about at time. And so before we sign off, I did want to give you the last word. When people are listening and they are trying to go off and start their own journey in sustainability, what's something that you want to leave them with?
Yeah, it's a great question. Probably two things. I think the one I referred to at the top, is shift from scarcity mindset to abundance mindset. We can either be scared of the global transition to zero carbon, we can see it as something we have to do, or we can see it as a massive opportunity. We're about to spend upwards of $50 trillion, $100 trillion on an economic transition. And those that really focus on creating zero carbon businesses now will be the leaders in that new economy. So I think there's a really strong sense of abundance that we need to adopt, that we can, create a lot of really great impacts for the community through, leaning into this problem. And I think the other one would be for folks who are looking to, find a foothold in sustainability. I met a lot of people along the way who are data analysts or, cloud engineers. And sometimes it can feel like sustainability is the domain of sustainability professionals. But at this point, there's enough businesses like Audette across the economy that you can join in or build one of your own, in response to this abundance. So this, I would say, reach out if you want to know more about what opportunities exist, or Audette is hiring.
That's true. I mean, if you're hiring, that's actually a good call out. I mean, that's a really good way to get into the space and participate and help be part of the solution, right? So absolutely. With that, I believe we're right at time, so I do want to close out. Thank you, Christopher, for spending time with us and talking about the exciting work that you're doing and talking about the sustainability area as a whole. And if you're listening, thank you for spending time with us. We definitely appreciate you listening to the interesting things that Christopher had to share with us. And with that, if you have any other questions or comments, please drop them right below, and also hit that like and subscribe button. I have to say that as a mandatory shout out. So yeah, stay tuned for the next episode as well. Thank you for all of your time and have a good day. Thanks, Christopher.
Thanks, Brian.